episode today is Meet the Speaker with Randy Gravitt. We're looking for CEOs who are interested in hiring keynote speakers, trainers, executive coaches, and for all of that, Randy is certainly one of those. We love to have Randy. If you can get his content at leadeveryday.com, randygravitt.com. You can go to ceozones.com and see Randy. Randy is very popular. He produces a daily show with his co-founder, Mark Miller, where they have Lead Every Day, the show, on YouTube and at a podcast near you. Randy recently wrote another book called Winning at Home, which I found to be very useful to me. Unfortunately, I got it about 48 years too late, as I'm almost gone into, matter of fact, the end of the week, I'll be married 49 years, to Terry, who's in Italy this week, so you can tell where her priority was. And you began your career as an educator, then you became a consulting client to people like the Pittsburgh Pirates, which living here in Pennsylvania, that we think that's a great thing. And then that little company based out of Atlanta, Georgia, called Chick-fil-A hired you. And after that, the rest is history. So I would like to say, welcome, Randy. We're really glad to have you as our guest today.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the opportunity. Love your show. Love the opportunity to be a part of what's going on here. And I'm excited about a good episode conversation here together. It should be great.
All right. So my first question is, why would you have co-founded Lead Every Day with Mark Miller? How did that get started? What was your why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started actually a company in 2014 called Integrate Leadership that did a lot of work with Chick-fil-A. You mentioned them, and Mark was the VP of Leadership Development there. And we co-created a lot of content for them. And so Mark, about a year and a half ago now, I guess it was the summer of 2023, he retired from Chick-fil-A after an illustrious 44, I think, year career. And Mark always says this. He said this at his retirement party. I actually had an opportunity to host that party, and he said something that day that just was amazing. He said, you retire from a job, you don't retire from a calling. And I thought that was so good. And he said, I'm on the planet to encourage and equip leaders, and I'm like-minded. I mean, that's really what I do with my time. We spend our time trying to help leaders chase high performance, be their best at work, more times than not, but we are passionate about helping people win at home as well. And so anyway, when Mark left the chicken, it just made sense for me to say, hey, let's rebrand Integrate to Lead Every Day, and Mark, there's nobody else. Somebody said to me a few weeks ago, if you get a chance to work with Mark Miller, you do it. And so when Mark said, I'll come help you do what you're doing, I thought, let's go for it. And so, yeah, it's been a lot of fun for the last 18 months formally, but really before that, 15 years, we've been trying to serve leaders around the world, and it's been just an amazing journey. So I'm just glad to be here.
Excellent. So I read as our conversations with Mark and you earlier this year that your mission is to see the world well led. What kind of goal do you put beside that kind of mission? What's your thinking behind how do you make goals, and how do you know you're moving in the right direction?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We're playing with that phrasing right now, and we think it's going to be, instead of a world well led, we think it's going to be your world well led, because I want it to be personal to the person who interacts with our content, with our training, with our consulting, our keynotes, all that stuff. It ultimately feels daunting to be. I mean, people say, "Oh, I want to change the world," but let's just start with our world. If we could just in our spot do the very best we can to be the leader that we need to be. And the reason we say a world well led or your world well led is because I believe if you have a good leader, it just makes everything better for you. And if you've ever been in a place where you didn't have such a good leader, you know it's not good. It's just not. And so there's a lot on the line here. And so any CEO that's listening, I want to encourage us to lead at our very best, because there's a lot of people around us that will benefit from that. And then ultimately we know if we do our best, we're going to benefit as well. The more value we add, the more valuable we're going to become. But I think if we can start with how do we help the people around us get better, and I'd love to see organizations be well led at every level, from the government to the schools to the churches and the communities, and I mean all businesses, everything in between. It all, Maxwell was right when he said it all rises and falls on leadership. I think that's really true.
You sparked a couple of random thoughts there. So I know Jimmy Collins at Chick-fil-A would say people don't quit companies, they quit their leader.
Yep.
And you're summarizing that pretty darn well, and he learned that from our mutual friend Truett Cathy. So I'm positive that that is in the blood, especially with Mark Miller and yourself working so close with Chick-fil-A. And then I guess I would say we have a similar alignment at CEO Zones because we're about the leader, not just leadership. And there's lots of facets of life that we would like to get involved with. So that's one of the reasons we're honored to have you as a Founders Club member, you and Mark both. So thank you very much for continuing to support us. Let's go back to having those CEOs hire you. So one of the things that came out June 11th, I believe, was your book called "Winning Begins at Home," which should be over my right shoulder in the picture there.
I see it back there in the back. Thanks for that. Little shout out.
Yeah. And the other books of our content partners are there. And I think the very first book under yours is Culture Rules by Mark Miller, your co-founder. And that book I just gravitated to a lot. And then Winning Begins at Home, I really wished I would have read at least 30 years ago. Would have been a lot easier on my children, my wife, because even on page 129, I think it is, I bookmarked it back there, where you give the 15 questions, kind of a self-assessment. You'd think as you read them quickly the first time, which I did. I was studying the book, right? But then I got to the questions and I skimmed them. And one of the questions made me go back to the beginning and say, wait a minute, I need to really read this. So how did you develop the questions is my big question behind all of that.
Yeah, that's great. I think I'm a big believer in that you have to start where you are. No matter what's going on in your life, I think you don't have to stay there, but you have to start there. And I think the power of assessment, and we hear the word assessment all the time. I don't even want to use the word assessment. I want to use a little bit different word. I would say the power of introspection. We hear about inspections all the time, Bill. People, government regulations and people in companies and businesses and systems and we're always inspecting stuff. But who takes the time to inspect on the inside, and how am I doing as the leader? And if we've heard before, if you can lead yourself, you've got a really good shot of leading everybody else. But if you can't lead yourself properly and assess how you're doing, there's the word assess. If you can't really know, like, what's my current reality, and I'll kind of take a side road here. There's a question in the Bible. I'm actually a Bible reader. I like to read the Bible, and for anybody that's listening who's not read the Bible, they probably have still heard of Adam and Eve, the first man and first woman, and they're in the Garden of Eden and they've eaten the forbidden fruit. And the second question ever asked is a question that God asked to them. And here's the question. He says, where are you? Now, if there is a God, let's just play that for a second. If there is a God, there's no chance he's lost Adam and Eve. He knows exactly where they are. But he needs for them to admit where they are. And I think that willingness to take a good, hard look in the mirror, and when I talk to people about this, a lot of times I'll remind them that there are different kinds of mirrors, right? There's the big mirror. If you go in a hotel room, there's always a big mirror where you brush your teeth and shave, whatever. But there's always, in a really nice hotel, a little mirror over on the side. And if you've not looked in one of these mirrors, anybody listening, don't look into it, because it's a scary mirror. That one. But my wife and I, we have 4 daughters, and they explained to me that is a makeup mirror. That's one where it's actually got 5 times the power, Bill, on one side. And if it's a nice makeup mirror, you flip it over, it's 10x over the big mirror. And it's really small, but it's just got this power. And I always challenge CEOs to take a makeup mirror look at their leadership. It's easy to take a flyby. How you doing? I'm doing fine. Nobody's quit this week, and or we still made payroll, or we got a little bit of profit, or whatever. We just fool ourselves into thinking things are okay when they really might not be. And you mentioned earlier, Jimmy, saying that people don't leave organizations, they leave leaders. I think there's something else that happens. Sometimes people leave you and they don't tell you. They actually stay and they take up the payroll and they're killing morale and it's just not, they're not engaged. I mean, we hear this all the time with quiet quitting and the great resignation. And so I think this is a big deal that we as leaders take a makeup mirror look at ourselves, introspection, like how am I really doing here? And is this sustainable? Am I going to be able to, play the movie forward? And what's this look like a year from now? Am I getting better, or am I just hanging on? And do I find myself, Mark and I talk about, in the leadership quicksand? If I'm not careful, I'll just be busy. I'll confuse activity with accomplishment. And the next thing you know, I'm just spinning my wheels, and we're really not making the progress toward the vision that we know we need to be. So that's a long answer, but I think that's where I go with that. It's just I want leaders, and that's why we have those questions. That, when you think about home, what are those questions that are going to make you look yourself in that mirror at home and think, what's it like? If you want to just boil it down, I'll stop with this. But if you want to boil it down to one question, what's it like to be led by me at work, and what's it like to be loved by me at home? And when you start asking that question and really start asking the people around you, those assessment questions will help. But if you just, in a simple way, what's it like to be loved by me, you ask yourself that question, I think we all have some places where we can make some improvements and some progress.
Amen. And those makeup mirrors always have a light, so you're looking at yourself and you're putting light right on it, right?
They do. That's exactly right.
Since I have a face for radio, I stay away from those kind of mirrors. But okay.
Amen on that for me too.
So you hit what I would say a couple of the key points of the book as you were talking and bringing in the rest of the story there. But one of the things you say is love first, live last. Could you expand on that, or maybe give us a little mini training for keynote speaker people that are looking to hire keynote speakers?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, well, let me first say we spend most of our time helping companies with all the leadership stuff and all that. And so Winning Begins at Home came from conversations I was actually having with CEOs who kept saying to me, we're applying the stuff you're talking about. Our culture's getting better. Our engagement's going up. We're executing better. We have a leadership culture. I mean, we got leaders, all that stuff was great. But things are not so great outside of home. And I couldn't find a resource to help leaders. I mean, there's a lot of books on marriage and parenting, but nothing really to help leaders have a conversation about winning outside of work. And I was talking to a guy who's asking the question, can you win in both places? And my statement, and you read it in the book, is I think if you win at work and you lose at home, I think you still lose. I don't think the goal is to build some great business and company and then forfeit the things that matter outside of work. And so we're struggling with all that. And so I just said it's very basic. We're pretty simple guys, and I thought at its very basic level, what would be the fundamentals of family life? I mean, we think about fundamentals in music. There are chords and scales and all that, and it's football season right now when we're taping this. Football fundamentals are blocking and tackling. We can go to any endeavor in life, really, and there are fundamentals. And then when I start thinking about it at home, like, who's ever teaching us the fundamentals? And so those two ideas, to love first and to live last, really became the fundamentals of family life. As I look back on our family now, I think you've been married 49 years. Yes. Yeah, okay, so we're a little behind you. We're at 37, but as well as I do, if after 4 or 5 decades, there's a lot of great days. It's just awesome when it works, and there's a lot of hard days when it doesn't work, and there are no perfect families, and so but if you go right back to where you started and how you got to where you are from where from where you started, there's a whole lot of these fundamentals that probably showed up. And so love first is about giving the other person what I call the home field advantage. Not having, love first is the way we talk to each other, the way we communicate. Are we harsh in our words, our tone of voice? giving a person the last word, not letting them have the first word and the last word, some of those kind of things. And we I mentioned had 4 daughters, and so it's totally different when you're trying to relate to a 15-year-old girl and you're a 40-year-old executive or whatever you got going on, and you got a son who's 12. I never had any sons, but you got a 12-year-old son and you're trying to connect with them and you're expecting them to live up to the standard that you're living up to at 35 or at 45. It's just, we don't want our 2-year-old to be childish. Well, they're children. They're supposed to be childish. And so they need to be trained and loved and led and all that stuff. But I think sometimes our expectations are so high for others if we don't love first. And so love first is there's so many things about it. Going at the speed of the other person, going maybe at the speed, some of us type A's may need to hear going at the speed of the slowest person. And not everybody's on the same pace in a family. And so I think just having conversations and really trying to connect with people, that's what love first is about. And one of the statements I made is that proximity is not the same thing as intimacy. I think you can live with somebody for decades and there not be connection. You can drive kids to school every single day and not be really connected. You go to restaurants, you see this all the time. You'll see maybe a husband, wife, couple of kids sitting around a table, Bill, and they're all on their devices. Maybe somebody's checking their schedule or their social media, and people playing video games, and they're together, but they're not really together. And so I think for love first, it's just trying to be there when you're there. That's the way we would say that. And then living last, to me, really, in its essence, is about servant leadership. And I mentioned it's football season. I think one of the best pictures of this is if you're listening and you like football, and I ask you to name a football player, or if you hate football and I ask you to name most people, the very first thing they would do would be to name a quarterback. They'll even name quarterbacks who are retired. I mean, they will name Peyton Manning and Tom Brady before they would ever name an offensive lineman. And yet, if you talk to a really good coach, they'll tell you that if you can't block the other team, you can't beat the other team. And those quarterbacks, literally, Bill, would be on their back if it weren't for those offensive linemen. And so you think about the mentality of an offensive lineman. They're not paid as well as those quarterbacks are. They're not appreciated a lot of times by fans, for sure, as much as those quarterbacks are. They're not as famous as they are. And yet they show up day after day and move people out of the way so somebody else can score. I mean, if you think about it, really it's basic. That's what an offensive lineman does. And I think the mom or dad who shows up day after day in a family life, and they're trying to create a hole so their kids can win. They're trying to help their spouse score. They're literally willing to give up their position to help somebody else gain position. That's such a powerful mindset. And I'll share one last little thing there on Live Last. My dad, when he was let me back up. The story in the book is the setting around. It's a business guy, but the setting is a little league baseball park, and a lot of the story happens there. It's a parable, and then the last you mentioned on page 129, the last 100 or so pages is a blueprint to help you apply what you learned in the story. So it's to create the family that you want. So my dad, he was our coach when I was a kid, and I guess I'd turned. It was Christmas time. Maybe I just turned 12 years old, and I was going to be the oldest kid in the Little League that year. I mean, I was going to be one of the old guys, and it's finally our time to be really good. And that was the Christmas that I received an aluminum baseball bat for Christmas. They had been invented maybe a couple years before. They made it to our hometown. I got one for Christmas, and I was so excited. I'm thinking, this is like a cheat code. This is going to be so good, because my brother and I are out in the backyard. We're hitting balls, and they're flying off this bat compared to an old wooden bat. And I thought, this is going to be so great. And my dad comes to me that spring, and he says, I want you to learn how to bunt. And I thought he had literally lost his mind. If you're not familiar with baseball, bunting is where you just basically, you tap the ball out in front of the plate when you have runners on base, and you're helping your teammates move up to the next base so somebody can come up later and get a hit and knock them in, and you can score runs. So you're basically making an out on purpose so somebody else can move up on the bases. And man, looking back, my dad had such wisdom in understanding that this was not really about Little League baseball. There's gonna come a time, Randy, where you're gonna be an adult and you're gonna need to learn to sacrifice for your kids and your spouse and and the people that you lead on your teams. That's what leaders do, right? The CEO is the one. What's the old Shakespeare quote? Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Part of that mantle of leadership is knowing that if you don't show up and serve and do if you're self-serving, it just doesn't work. But if you get this right, and I think we know that, but we're all, selfish. We're all human, and if we're not careful, we'll just bypass that. And when we do, especially at home, our families don't work. They really don't. They need to have somebody who says, okay, I'm going to yield my rights. I'm going to sacrifice for the people that I live with. And if you have that mindset, it's amazing how it brings a family together. And then you start to see that behavior. But people need a leader. People always watch the leader. And a mom or dad who chooses to live last and to open up a hole so somebody else in the family can win, it just becomes so powerful. So, yeah, those are the fundamentals of family life. We talk about them at work, all the fundamentals of leadership and alignment and engagement, all that stuff. I thought, why don't we have some fundamentals at home? And so, we wrote it, and hopefully it's been helpful to some people. I know it has. We've been hearing great stories. A lot of fun.
And you dedicated it to your dad, which kind of added to the theme, I think. So congratulations on that to your dad.
That's right.
And it's not a story without some props to make you take some action to try to change. So it was a really well done book, and I appreciated it.
Well, thank you.
And
I will say, if anybody is I will just mention, if a lot of companies that we've worked with are getting a copy for all their people, and they're starting this conversation because it's just, I mean, think about it. We go to work and we know how to get a promotion. We know how to, what's on the job description. We know what's on the expectation list. But when we go home, so many times we don't know what to do. Like, I want to have a good family, but how do I do that? And so that blueprint in the back is a way to start that conversation, not just in your own family life for the reader, but we got a bunch of people that are giving it to their friends and family, and they're starting that conversation together. And I think it is going to be a great tool for leaders everywhere.
Back to that mutual connection point of Chick-fil-A with us, the first few operators, Truett interviewed the children and the spouse and as many extended family as he could, because he knew he'd get the truth at that point, right?
That's good.
And there was very little turnover back in those old days. But so he knew it was all about the family, and I think he taught 13-year-old Sunday school for decades, if I recall, right. 40 or 50 years. Which is pretty tough when you were building a business that was mall-based on Saturdays at the time and flying all over the country to get back on Sunday morning. Showed his dedication.
He was there. I mean, I love the fact that Truett was always investing in the next generation. It's something I'm passionate about as well. And to do it like he did would be just that's the goal. I mean, that's amazing.
So I'm going to go back to Lead Every Day, your Instagram, Lead Every Day Academy. And it just boggles my mind, how can the two of you, and you have a small team, I'll say, but how can the two of you just produce great content day in, day out, every day? I checked this morning, you have over 960 Instagram posts as an example. How do you churn that out? And how do you, I guess one of the things around Lead Every Day Academy, it says you're like Netflix for leadership development. That's positive. That's powerful. How do you get it all done is my question.
Well, yeah, I would say we do have a good team that is helping with some of that, so that it wouldn't happen. We'll produce the content, but to get it where it's supposed to go, we've got people that help with that. So that part's great. How do we do it? We just really are passionate about encouraging and equipping leaders. There's a couple of things I would say there. I'm an old school teacher. Back in the day, I spent time teaching, and I wasn't qualified to teach. I had a principal actually who was desperate that hired me, which was kind of a long, crazy story. But anyway, I'll just say and I started at the beginning of January. It was middle of the year. A teacher had left. They were in a bad situation. I got a job, and I was only 23 at the time, and I was teaching ninth grade biology, and which again, I wasn't qualified to teach at all. I basically would go and read the chapter the night before, and I'd just stay a little bit ahead of the class, you know. And I always say the ninth graders didn't want to be in the class any more than I did, so we made it. Somehow we survived the year. And I got hired back for the following fall, which was a miracle, probably looking back. But what I learned was you're not going to be able to wing it as a teacher. There's a thing called a scope and sequence. If you think about it, you don't start in calculus in first grade. If you know anybody's listening, got a first grader, they're going to go to first grade. They're going to get some numbers. They're going to learn to count, and they're going to learn to add and subtract and multiply and divide, and they'll get some fractions and algebra and geometry, and maybe at some point I never made it to calculus even, but some people do, but they don't start there. And I think so many times as leaders, we promote somebody to a position, and our training for them is something like, hey, if you need anything, Bill, just let me know. Well, they don't know how to lead a meeting. They don't know how to build a team. We've never taught them how to solve a problem. They may not even know very much at all about what it is we're putting them into. And then 6 weeks later, they haven't said anything. I told them to say something and let me know if you need something. They hadn't said anything. I'm not happy with their performance. And so I'm frustrated. And because of that, I need to make some kind of shift. And so I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's the wrong person. I get rid of them. Really, the issue is on me. I've not done my job to teach and train them. And so Mark and I thought we've got to have a process for teaching leadership. And that's what we developed really for Chick-fil-A. It was not, I mean, if we're not careful, it just becomes random acts of training. And I think so many people who are listening maybe can relate to, I read this book, and so that sounds good, and let's go get this guy to come speak. And I mean, we're just hoping something sticks. And so we thought we're going to create a process to how do you become a better leader? Go back to what you and I were talking about a few minutes ago. And then how are you going to improve your team's performance? It's not just enough to grow yourself. How do you build a high performance team? And so we've done a lot of research around that. Had people that helped us with that. And then how do you ultimately strengthen your organization? It's, you know, most people listening are doing something that's bigger than just a team. They have a vision to build a company or, you know, a community, whatever. And so we started creating content that was purposeful, but that had a scope and sequence to it. And we call it an operating system now. It's like your operating system on your phone. You don't really know it's there, but it updates all the time. And that's what's causing the apps to work and the phone to work and all that stuff. And so embedding this operating system of how do you do self-leadership, how do you build a team, and how do you ultimately grow an organization, that content becomes the DNA that causes an organization to reach its potential. We ask leaders, you know, what are you capable of? And oftentimes it's way more than what they think, and certainly more than what they have going on. And so the content has really helped with that. And so that's kind of the backdrop to your question. The answer to your question is, because we believe in it so much and we're helping people and we're seeing results, we just discipline ourselves to show up and record content, and you know, we're trying to build out this ecosystem. And time has been our friend. I've been working on it for 11 years now. So you show up every day and do a little bit, and it's amazing what happens over time. So yeah, and the academy, I'll mention you mentioned the Instagram and social and all that stuff. LinkedIn, we're there every day, but the academy is the Netflix for leadership term you use there. We've created all of our content in digital form because not everybody's going to have us to come and do training or a workshop or a keynote, but they still want access, and so they can go to leadeverydayacademy.com, and we've got plans for individuals and teams and organizations there that would help them. It's micro content there. These modules that we've created in these classes are 4 or 5 minutes. It gives you stuff to listen to. We're teaching it, and then there's some assessment stuff and some meeting questions, things that you can talk about if you're doing it as a team with your supervisor. It's just a fully orbed way to develop leaders. If you want to do more of that yourself, if you want to partner with us to come and outsource leadership development, we do that as well. But not every, a lot of people have learning and development. They want to do that. They're just looking for content, but not just random content, something that's going to be much more process driven. And so that's our heart. We're students and practitioners.
So your book hits on personal success. My trick question is going to be, how do you define success for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I will say I do want to reach my potential, and that's not an answer to the question. Go back to what we're capable of. I mean, I really don't want to squander my life. I don't want to get down the road and feel like have regrets. And so that's kind of the way I think about it. But specifically to your question, when I go home and I think about being at home and success there, I've got a question that I ask myself that this might be helpful to anybody who's listening who's really wants to win outside of work. And the question I ask myself is this: do the people who know me the best actually love me the most? It's so easy for the people who know us the best to, I've heard it before, I respect them the least. Well, that's not what you want. We all know that. But it's easy to act a certain way at work and then come home and let your hair down, so to speak, and they're obligated to live with me or whatever. Well, actually, I don't want somebody to just be obligated to live here. I want us to like each other here. I want us to have connection here. I want us to have relationship here, and I think about some of those kind of things. But at the end of the day, I want to live a life of integrity. I want to, and when I say integrity, I'm literally using the math word integer there. It's a person who is whole. I don't want to be fractional in the way I live my life. I don't want to be great at work and then not so great at home, or really even great at home and not reaching my potential at work. I think you can win in both places, and I think that's the goal. And so, at the end of the day, as a person of faith, am I being an imitator of God, and am I living a life of love? And I think if I do that, then I'll feel good about it. And if I don't do that, I'll get to the end and I'll look back, and I think that's where regret lies, when we know we didn't steward what we've been entrusted with. So yeah, it's a never-ending quest. I mean, it's not easy, but hopefully we're making a little progress here.
God keeps making that journey interesting. Every time I think I get an area nailed down. Yes. So one of the keynote topics you have given many times is chess, not checkers. So can you give our audience, CEOs looking to hire a keynote speaker, what might that topic bring to their organization?
Well, yeah, that's great. It serves a little bit as the box top for the way we think about leadership, and that came from a pilot that we actually ran with Chick-fil-A about chasing how to become a high-performance organization. It's one thing to be, if you think about, let's just take a CEO's listening. You're good, and your leadership team is good. But what would happen if every single person on your payroll really leaned in and you had everybody together? That's what a high-performance organization is. It's not, we use the metaphor of a tug of war. You got the leaders on one side of the rope, and it's exhausting if you're pulling against everybody. And so you hire a few people to become that leadership team, and now the few of you are pulling, but you got all the other employees on the other side. How amazing would it be if you could get everybody on the same side of the rope, pulling against the competition toward the goal, toward the vision? And so when we wrote the content around that, Mark had actually written a book called Chess, Not Checkers, and we developed all those derivative resources and started training that and doing keynotes around that. What we found was there are so many organizations that are duct taped together. They're just, however you want to say it, they're flying by the seat of their pants. I had one CEO who told me, I feel like every day I come to the office and I'm playing whack-a-mole, the old county fair game where you got the hammer and the little mole pops up and you hit it with the furry mole and it pops down and then the next one pops up. And he said, I just feel like every day I'm just putting out fires, living in this doom loop, so to speak. And so think about the two games. Checkers is a very fast-paced, highly, reactionary. Every piece on the board does the same thing. Yet, other than you have to take your jumps, there's not a lot of rules. It's just it's a pretty mindless game. Chess, much more strategic. You gotta think a few moves ahead. Every person on your payroll, if you want to think of it in that way, they're unique in their skills, and some are, can do major, work, maybe outside of what you're asking them to do. And then there's some people that are better suited for something that maybe they're not in their sweet spot. I mean, there's a lot of things when you start aligning people. Peter Drucker always said one of the most important things a leader does is determine who's going to do what. And so when you start really thinking about this strategically, your business, it's again, the box top is this idea that we can play chess. And I say the box top, there are 4 moves that we found that high performance organizations make. Let's think about them here for a second. So the first one is they are well led, or you could say it however you want. We used to say they bet on leadership, but there's a leadership culture. You're not going to be able to start a new vertical or offload a project or whatever unless you've got a leader that you can put on it. And I think so many organizations fail to develop leaders in waiting, leaders who are ready to take on that next thing. We give them a stretch assignment or an opportunity. So we do a lot around building that leadership culture. The second piece really kind of goes back to that tug of war, but it's the alignment piece, the culture piece. They build culture. They're passionate about hiring the right people, making sure those people are aligned. That there's so much that goes into that, vision and values and systems and structures and process. So we help organizations with all that, and oftentimes CEOs think that the priority is one thing, and you start talking to other people on the payroll, and they're like, they're not saying the same thing. And so there's obviously work to do there. The third piece of it's in a pyramid the way we draw it, but the third piece is that they act as one. This is about engagement, and I'm sorry, not act as one. This is about winning the heart. The engagement piece is about the heart of people, and I think sometimes we fail to appreciate that people are people. We want to see them as employees, and really great leaders seem to be able to understand that people are people before they're employees. And when you give people responsibility and you connect them to the vision and you affirm them and you create an environment where engagement can happen, people usually lean in. Give them more responsibility. Sometimes we think if we give more responsibility, they'll lean back. Actually, the research would show the opposite. You give people more responsibility, they'll take care of their area better. And then ultimately, any business, all those things are enablers for the final, really the top of the pyramid is to excel at execution. It's about execution. If you think about businesses that are in the shipping, let's say FedEx or UPS, if the packages don't arrive the next day, then they kill their brand. Same thing, take Chick-fil-A. If the food's not hot and the place is not clean and the people are not friendly, they wouldn't have the reputation that they do. And think about any sports teams. If they don't win, ultimately, that's what they're going to be judged on. And so I think execution, and we define that as every single person does the right thing the right way every time, which sounds daunting, but it's amazing if you make that the goal, not an expectation, because if it's an expectation, you're going to make some mistakes. That's disheartening if I feel like I'll never measure up. But if my goal is every day I take personal responsibility, I'm going to do the right thing the right way every time, it's amazing what these companies can do. And now I'll give one little warning here before I close that thought. I think so many leaders want to talk just about execution. They love the like, that's where I'm going to make my money, they think, and that's where our profits are. It's like, can we just execute? If we could just do that. And they forget about leadership and alignment and engagement, leadership, culture, and engagement. If you don't understand that those are the enablers we say to stick the landing. It's like the gymnast who says, I just want to do the dismount. It's like it may be fun to fly through the air and stick the landing, I'm sure it is, but if she doesn't understand that the entire routine is what gives her the momentum and the energy to stick the landing, she will always leave points on the table. And I think in the same way, the CEO who doesn't understand that leadership and culture and engagement are the enablers, you'll never execute at your potential if you don't understand that. So that chess, not checkers, that just gives us a way to purposefully think about leadership and culture and engagement, ultimately that leads to execution. And you can be world class, or you can just say, we're going to wing it and hope it turns out. And Mark and I always say, hope is not a strategy. You know, you have to behave your way to high performance. And the best companies I know of, they're well led, they're aligned, their people are leaned in, and they deliver.
Excellent. It's been a real pleasure to have you today as our guest. As we bring this episode of Meet the Speaker to a close, CEOs and business owners, are you ready to hire Randy? How you would get a hold of Randy is randy@randygravitt.com. The website, leadeveryday.com. His email, randy@leadeveryday. He's available at CEO Zones as a content partner. He's one of our founding members. He came on board long before we had a website and started to share his content with us. And he's a member of our app community, so you can engage with him personally inside our app community with CEOs and owners. And we really found it, I really found it. I guess I can't say we. I really found it educational several times today to be reminded and or spark a new thought. So I really appreciate that, and I hope our audience does too. Thank you so much, Randy.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate all you do for CEOs and leaders everywhere. It's an honor to be a part of what you're doing.
Thank you.